The autumn rain drummed against the windows of the Boston Public Library's Special Collections Room in October 2024. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a curator specializing in early American photography, carefully unwrapped a donated collection of glass plate negatives from the early 1900s. The donor's letter had been brief, found in my grandmother's attic in Salem, Massachusetts. Thought they might be of historical interest. Elena held the first plate up to the light box, her trained eye immediately assessing its condition. The image was remarkably well preserved. A formal family portrait from 1904. 7 people arranged in typical Victorian fashion. A patriarch and matriarch seated in the center, flanked by 5 children of varying ages. She placed the plate under her digital scanner, watching as the high-resolution image appeared on her computer screen. The technology revealed every detail with startling clarity: the texture of the fabrics, the expressions frozen in time, the slight blur of movement from the youngest child who had probably fidgeted during the long exposure. That's when Elena noticed it. The youngest child, a boy who appeared to be about 4 years old, sat on his mother's lap at the front of the composition. His face showed the typical solemn expression expected in photographs of that era. But his hands, resting in his lap, were positioned in an unusual way. Elena zoomed in on the image, her pulse quickening. The child's small fingers were arranged in a specific pattern, not random, not natural. They formed shapes, deliberate and unmistakable. It looked almost like... She reached for her reference books on historical sign language and communication methods. The boy was signing. In the middle of this formal family portrait from 1904, this child was using his hands to communicate something, and whatever message he was sending had been hidden in plain sight. For 120 years, Elena spent the entire night researching American Sign Language history and its evolution in the early 20th century. By dawn, she had confirmed her initial suspicion. The hand positions were indeed signs, though they used an older form of ASL that differed slightly from modern conventions. She contacted Dr. Marcus Chen, a linguistics professor at Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C., who specialized in historical deaf communication. She emailed him high-resolution scans of the photograph. His response came within hours. "This is extraordinary. Can we video call?" Marcus's face filled her laptop screen, his expression animated. He signed as he spoke, a habit Elena had noticed during their previous collaborations. "The child is using American Sign Language from the early 1900s. Do you see how his right hand is positioned? That's the sign for danger. And his left hand, that's help." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. A 4-year-old child was signing danger and help during a family portrait? "There's more." Marcus enlarged a section of the image. "Look at his thumb placement on the left hand. That's not quite standard ASL. It's a modification that was sometimes used in institutional settings, schools for the deaf, asylums. It was a way to communicate more specifically. In this context, combined with the other signs, I believe he's saying, 'Help me' or 'danger here.' But why would a deaf child be positioned front and center in a formal family portrait? Wouldn't families of that era have..." Elena hesitated, uncomfortable with the historical reality. "Hidden him away." "Yes, often." Marcus's expression grew somber. Deaf children in 1904 were frequently institutionalized, hidden from society, or treated as burdens. The fact that he's in this portrait at all is unusual. The fact that he's using sign language in it, that's either incredibly brave or desperately risky. Elena examined the photograph more closely. The family looks prosperous. Good clothing, professional studio portrait. They had resources, which makes this even more interesting. Who were they? And what was this child trying to tell someone? Elena looked at the backs of the glass plates. A small label read, "Whitmore Studio, Salem, Massachusetts, November 1904. She had her starting point, Salem, Massachusetts, still carried echoes of its complicated past as Elena walked through the historic district. The address for Whitmore Studio led her to a brick building that now housed a bookstore, but the facade retained its original 1890s character. At the Salem Historical Society, archivist David Porter greeted her with enthusiasm. "Whitmore Studio? Oh yes, we have their business records. They were quite prominent from 1895 to 1918. He brought out 3 leather-bound ledgers, their pages filled with meticulous handwriting. "What date are you looking for?" "November 1904. A family portrait, 7 people, including a young deaf child. David's fingers traced down the entries. Here, November 12, 1904. Kensington family portrait. 7 subjects. Payment in full, $8.50. There's an address listed, 47 Charter Street, Elena wrote quickly. Any other notes? Yes, actually. David pointed to a margin notation. It says special accommodation required. Young boy unable to hear instructions. Mother requested minimal time. And there's something else written here in pencil. Looks like it was added later. Difficult session. Father insistent on specific arrangement. Elena felt that familiar tightening in her chest that came with discovering hidden stories. Do you have city directories from that period? Within an hour, she had assembled a profile. The Kensington family. Harrison Kensington, age 42, listed as a physician. His wife Catherine, age 38. 5 children, Thomas, 16, Margaret, 14, Elizabeth, 11, William, 8, and the youngest, Samuel, 4. The 1904 Salem City Directory listed Dr. Harrison Kensington's medical practice at his home address. His specialty, nervous disorders and ailments of the mind. Elena's stomach turned. In 1904, nervous disorders was often code for mental health treatment, and treatment methods of that era were notoriously brutal, especially for those considered defective, including deaf children. Is the house still standing? Elena asked. David nodded. 47 Charter Street is now a private residence, but the structure is original. The current owners are the Morrison family. They've been there about 10 years. Elena had to see that house. But first, she needed to learn more about Dr. Harrison Kensington and his methods of treating children like Samuel. The Massachusetts Medical Society archives were housed in a climate-controlled facility in Waltham. Elena requested all records related to Dr. Harrison Kensington's medical practice and publications. The material that arrived made her feel physically ill. Dr. Kensington had published several articles in medical journals between 1898 and 1910. The titles alone revealed his philosophy. The treatment of congenital deafness through corrective discipline, managing defective children in the home environment, and the application of restraint therapy for communication disorders. Elena forced herself to read. The language was clinical, detached, describing children as subjects rather than human beings. Kensington advocated for corrective measures that included physical restraint, isolation, and what he called communication suppression therapy, essentially punishing deaf children for using sign language in an attempt to force them to lip read and speak. One passage stood out. The deaf child must understand that gesticulation is unacceptable in civilized society. When the child attempts to use hand signals, immediate corrective action must be taken. I have found that binding the hands during meals and lessons proves most effective. The child learns quickly that communication must occur through proper means or not at all. Elena's hands shook as she photographed the pages. This wasn't medicine. It was torture disguised as treatment. She found records of Kensington's patients. Between 1895 and 1910, he had treated 17 children for deafness and associated behavioral disorders. Most were his own private patients, treated in his home. The outcomes were rarely documented, but 2 death certificates appeared in the files. Children who had died while under his care, causes listed as complications from congenital defects and failure to thrive. One more document caught her attention. A letter from the Massachusetts School for the Deaf, dated March 1903, addressed to Dr. Kensington. The school's director wrote, "We must respectfully decline your request to tour our facilities and observe our teaching methods. Your published views on deaf education are fundamentally incompatible with our philosophy of fostering communication through sign language. We believe your methods cause harm rather than healing." The school had recognized what Kensington was doing and had refused to enable it. But in his own home, with his own youngest child, there was no one to stop him. Samuel had been living under the authority of a father who believed his deafness needed to be punished and corrected. Elena stood outside, 47 Charter Street on a gray November morning, exactly 120 years after the photograph had been taken. The 3-story Victorian house had been beautifully restored, its original architectural details preserved. Jennifer Morrison answered the door with a welcoming smile. "You're the researcher from Boston? Please come in." I'm fascinated by the history of this house. Inside, the home had been modernized while maintaining its period character. Original wood floors, crown molding, and a grand staircase spoke to the building's prosperous past. We've done quite a bit of renovation, Jennifer explained, leading Elena through the first floor. This was Dr. Kensington's medical office. She indicated a room with large windows overlooking the garden. We use it as a library now. Elena examined the space, trying to imagine it as it had been in 1904. Did you find anything unusual during the renovations? Old documents, personal items? Actually, yes. Jennifer's expression grew more serious. When we were redoing the attic, we found some things hidden in a wall cavity. I'll show you. They climbed to the third floor. The attic had been converted into a bright studio space, but Jennifer led Elena to a closet where several boxes were stored. The contractor found these sealed behind a false wall. We think they were hidden deliberately. She opened the first box. Inside were medical journals, patient files, and personal notebooks belonging to Dr. Kensington. But underneath those was something else, a smaller wooden box. Locked. We've never opened this one, Jennifer said. It seemed too personal, and we didn't have a key. But given what you're researching, Elena's heart raced. May I try? The lock was old, but still functional. Elena carefully worked at it with a small tool from her bag. After several minutes, it clicked open. Inside the box were letters, dozens of them, written in a child's uncertain hand. The earliest was dated 1903, the latest 1907. All were addressed to Mama, but had never been sent. Elena lifted the first letter carefully. The handwriting was shaky, the spelling phonetic and incorrect, but the message was heartbreakingly clear. Dear Mama, Papa hurt my hands today because I made signs at breakfast. He says I am bad. I try to be good, but I cannot hear what he says to do. Thomas helps me sometimes, but Papa gets angry. I am scared, Mama. Why do you let Papa hurt me? Elena spent the afternoon reading Samuel's letters while Jennifer Morrison sat nearby, visibly shaken. The progression of the correspondence painted a devastating picture of a child's suffering. October 1903. Dear Mama, Papa locked me in the cellar again. It is dark and I am scared. I cannot hear if someone is coming. I tried to tell Margaret I was hungry, but Papa saw me signing and hit my hands with his stick. They hurt very much. Please tell Papa I will try harder to be good. March 1904. Dear Mama, today Mrs. Fletcher from the deaf school came to visit. She signed to me and I was so happy I cried. She told Papa I should go to her school where I can learn and talk with my hands. Papa became very angry after she left. He told me if I ever sign again, he will tie my hands behind my back for a whole day. Mama, why is signing bad? Mrs. Fletcher said it is how deaf people talk. Am I not supposed to talk at all? August 1904. Dear Mama, I saw you crying in the garden today. I wanted to hug you, but Papa says I must not touch anyone without permission. Did I make you sad? Thomas says you are sad because of me, because I am not normal. I am sorry I am not normal, Mama. I wish I could hear so you would not be sad. The letter dated November 10th, 1904, just 2 days before the family portrait, was longer and more desperate. Dear Mama, Papa says we are having our photograph made on Friday. He says I must sit very still and look at the camera. He says if I move my hands at all, he will send me away to the asylum. Thomas told me the asylum is where they put bad children who cannot be fixed. Mama, I do not want to go to the asylum. I will sit very still. I will not sign. But Mama, what if someone could help? What if I could tell someone I need help? Papa says no one would believe a deaf boy over a respected doctor. But what if I could tell them without words? Would anyone see? Would anyone help me? Elena's eyes filled with tears. Samuel had planned it. He had known the photograph was coming, and he had decided to use it, to hide his plea for help where his father might not notice, but where someone, someday, might see. Jennifer wiped her own eyes. Did anyone help him? What happened to Samuel? That was exactly what Elena needed to discover. She returned to the Medical Society archives and requested death certificates and institutional records for Samuel Kensington. What she found was worse than she had imagined. The records showed that Samuel Kensington had been committed to the Danvers State Asylum for the Insane on January 15, 1905, just 2 months after the family photograph. He was 4 years old. The commitment papers, signed by his father, Dr. Harrison Kensington, stated, "Patient exhibits defective communication abilities, resistant behavior, and signs of mental deficiency. Despite extensive home treatment, patient shows no improvement and poses increasing difficulty for family management. Recommend institutional placement for patient's welfare and family protection. Elena knew that Danvers State Asylum, later renamed, had been one of the most notorious institutions in Massachusetts, where overcrowding, abuse, and experimental treatments were common. It had finally closed in 1992 amid scandals about patient treatment. She contacted the Massachusetts State Archives, which housed the asylum's records. After explaining her research, she was granted access to Samuel Kensington's file. The file was thin, just 15 pages documenting 3 years of a child's life. The intake examination, conducted by asylum doctors rather than his father, noted, "Patient is deaf, but otherwise appears physically healthy. No evidence of mental deficiency observed. Patient attempts to communicate using hand gestures, suggesting normal cognitive function. Recommend placement in deaf education program rather than general population." That recommendation had been ignored. Samuel had been placed in the children's ward with severely mentally ill patients, many of whom were violent or catatonic. The ward notes, written by nurses, documented his deterioration. March 1905. Samuel K. cries frequently, refuses food. Attempts to communicate with hands. Staff instructed to restrain hands to prevent behavior. July 1905. Samuel K. increasingly withdrawn. No longer attempts communication. Sits alone, rocks back and forth. Weight loss noted. December 1905. Samuel K. non-responsive to stimuli. Does not eat unless fed. Shows no interest in surroundings. The final entry was dated March 18, 1906. Samuel Kensington, age 5, expired at 3:20 a.m. Cause of death, pneumonia, complicated by general failure to thrive. He had survived just 14 months in the asylum. A deaf child, punished his entire short life for being unable to hear, had died alone and probably terrified, unable to understand why he had been abandoned. The death certificate listed his father as next of kin. There was no record of burial location, no marker, nothing to show that Samuel Kensington had ever existed except these clinical notes, and one family photograph where his small hands had desperately signed for help. Elena needed to know what had happened to the rest of the Kensington family. Had they known? Had they cared? Or had they simply erased Samuel from their history? She traced the family through census records and city directories. After Samuel's death, the Kensingtons had remained in Salem until 1910, when they moved to Providence, Rhode Island. Dr. Harrison Kensington continued practicing medicine until his death in 1923. Catherine Kensington lived until 1935. The 4 surviving children, Thomas, Margaret, Elizabeth, and William, had all married and had families of their own. Elena found their obituaries, wedding announcements, and family records. None mentioned a brother named Samuel. In family trees compiled by genealogists, Samuel's name appeared in birth records but then simply disappeared, as if he had never existed. But then Elena found something unexpected, a diary. The Massachusetts Historical Society had acquired a collection of personal papers from Margaret Kensington Thornton's estate in 1965. Elena requested access to the materials, and among the household accounts and social correspondence, she found a small leather diary dated 1906-1910. Margaret had been 14 when the photograph was taken, 16 when Samuel died. Her diary entries from early 1906 were routine: school, friends, parties. Then, in March 1906, the tone changed. March 20th, 1906. "I received word today that Samuel has died at the asylum." Mother cried but said nothing. Father seemed relieved, though he pretends to mourn. "I am supposed to pretend he never existed, to forget I ever had a younger brother. But I cannot forget. I remember how he looked at me with those pleading eyes, how his small hands moved in desperate attempts to speak, how Father would strike him for it. I remember the photograph session when Samuel's hands moved in those signs he had learned from the deaf school teacher. I saw what he was doing. I knew he was asking for help. And I did nothing. I said nothing. I was a coward, afraid of Father's anger, afraid of being sent away myself. Now Samuel is dead, and I must live with the knowledge that I could have saved him and did not." Elena's throat tightened as she continued reading. April 1906. "I have made a decision. I will remember Samuel. I will not let him disappear as if he never lived. When I am grown and have children of my own, I will tell them about their uncle who was deaf and who deserved love but received only cruelty. I will make sure someone remembers. Elena traced Margaret's descendants. Margaret had married John Thornton in 1915 and had 3 children. Her daughter, Ruth, was still alive, 93 years old and living in a nursing home in Portland, Maine. Elena made the drive on a cold December morning. Ruth Thornton Hayes sat by a window in the facility's common room, her mind still sharp despite her age. "My mother told me about Samuel," Ruth said after Elena explained her research. "She made me promise to remember him, to never let the family forget what had been done. But the rest of the family, my uncles and aunt, they wanted no part of it. They said it was shameful to speak of such things, that Samuel had been defective and his institutionalization was necessary. But my mother never believed that." Ruth reached for a photo album on the side table. "Mother kept this. She wasn't supposed to have it, but she took it when she left home." She opened the album to a familiar image, the 1904 family portrait. But this copy was different. Someone had drawn a careful circle around Samuel's hands and written in small, precise handwriting, "He was asking for help." "We failed him." "Mother wrote that," Ruth said softly. "She kept the photograph her whole life. When I was young, she would show it to me and explain what Samuel's hands were doing. She made me learn basic sign language so I would understand. She said Samuel had been smart and brave, and that the real defect was in the people who hurt him, not in him." Ruth pulled out an envelope. "Mother wrote something before she died. She asked me to keep it safe in case anyone ever asked about Samuel. She said someday someone might want to know the truth." Inside was a letter written in 1964, Margaret's handwriting now elderly, but still clear. "To whoever reads this, my brother Samuel was born deaf in 1900. He was not mentally deficient. He was not defective. He was a beautiful, intelligent child who deserved love and patience. Instead, he received cruelty from our father, who saw his deafness as a flaw to be corrected through punishment and isolation. When Samuel tried to communicate using sign language, Father beat him. When he could not follow spoken instructions he could not hear, Father called him stupid and locked him away." On November 12, 1904, we sat for a family portrait. Samuel was 4 years old. I watched as he carefully positioned his hands in his lap, forming signs he had learned, the signs for danger and help. He was so small, so brave. He was trying to tell someone, anyone, that he needed rescue. I understood what he was doing. I said nothing. 2 months later, Father had him committed to Danvers Asylum, where he died within a year. I have carried this guilt my entire life. I was 14 years old and afraid of my father, but that is no excuse. I should have spoken. I should have fought for Samuel. I didn't, and he died because of our collective silence. If you are reading this, if you have found Samuel's story, please know this. He mattered. His life had value. His deafness was not a flaw. It was simply a different way of experiencing the world. The tragedy was not that Samuel could not hear. The tragedy was that we would not listen. Elena's research became a comprehensive exhibit at the Boston Public Library in March 2025, titled Silent Voices: The Story of Samuel Kensington and Deaf Children in Early 20th Century America. The centerpiece was the 1904 photograph, enlarged and displayed with detailed explanation of Samuel's hand signs. Beside it, Elena had curated Samuel's letters, Margaret's diary entries, and historical context about the treatment of deaf children in that era. The exhibit included contributions from Dr. Marcus Chen, who provided historical analysis of sign language and deaf education. Representatives from the Massachusetts School for the Deaf created an educational component explaining how sign language is a complete, sophisticated language, and how early advocates had fought against doctors like Harrison Kensington, who viewed deafness as something to be cured through punishment. Ruth Hayes attended the opening, now 94 years old. She stood before her great-uncle's photograph for a long time, then turned to the assembled crowd. Samuel was denied a voice his entire life, she said through an interpreter who signed her words. But he found a way to speak. He left a message that lasted 120 years, waiting for someone to see it and understand. Today, we finally hear him. The exhibit prompted the Massachusetts State Legislature to issue a formal apology for the treatment of deaf and disabled children in state institutions. Samuel's name was added to a memorial for children who died at Danvers Asylum. Finally acknowledging his existence and his suffering, Elena arranged for a proper burial marker to be placed at the asylum's memorial cemetery, with Samuel's name, dates, and a simple inscription: Samuel Kensington, 1900-1906. He tried to tell us. Now we listen. The photograph from 1904 had preserved more than just an image. In the positioning of a 4-year-old's fingers, it had captured a desperate plea that transcended time, waiting patiently for someone to notice, to care, to act. Samuel's hands, frozen in that moment of silent courage, had finally delivered their message. And 120 years later, the world was finally listening.